Our next speaker, John D. Woodward, Jr., is a professor in the Pardee School of Global Studies here at Boston University. Prior to coming to BU in 2015, Professor Woodward spent over 30 years in the United States national security community, including 21 years as a CIA officer and 8 years as a senior analyst at Rand Corporation. In his Rhett talk, The Wicked, Hard Problem of Countering the Use of Biological Weapons, he will discuss the growing risks and difficult intelligence and national security challenges posed by biological weapons. Please join me in welcoming Professor Woodward.
Thank you. Good evening. I guess we're going to keep with the biological theme. Actually, Dr. Coe, you know a lot more about dangerous pathogens than I, so if you want to give my talk. Yeah. No, don't worry, that's not necessary because even though I'm scientifically and technically incompetent, that's never prevented me from speaking authoritatively on any science or technology. Speaking of technology, let's figure out if we can drive this thing. I feel bad in a way, I'm sorry. I don't have a trigger warning for you tonight. I'm hoping we can just stipulate that seeing videos and photos of people suffering from smallpox or in the final death throes of the Ebola virus are pretty gross and grotesque. So I'm not going to have any of those in my talk. Instead, we're going to go for audience participation. First, we have to give it a New England title. Here's the audience participation part. You're a bright group. True or false? In the 20th century, more deaths were caused by deliberate use of biological weapons than by nuclear weapons or by chemical weapons. Think about that? No? According to Dan Coates, the director of national intelligence, he said in 2018, North Korea has a long-standing biological weapons capability. Is that true or false? You're getting a little nervous now, aren't you? Pay close attention to number 3. Ebola, a deadly virus for which there is neither a U.S. government-approved vaccine nor cure, is present on the BU campus. All 3 are true, but the good news is we got Rhett's attention. Rhett's paying attention now. But all 3 are true, right? For number 1, most people think nuclear. It depends how you count, but we know that in the 20th century, nature on her own does a really great job of killing a lot of us with infectious disease, but humans have done a very good job of deliberately using biological weapons to kill people. That's mostly associated with the Second World War and the Imperial Japanese Army, primarily in their activities with respect to China. Okay. Well, let's fast forward, get a little bit closer to the present time. So here we have then President Barack Obama talking about how, in many ways, we're currently more vulnerable than ever with respect to biological issues. For the days when there was adult supervision in the White House. I yearn for those days. We also have this World Economic Forum. So this is where the world's heavy hitters get together and they go to nice places like Davos, Switzerland. And I got to be careful because I actually think some senior BU faculty have gone to these events. But you can see they identified their top 10 list of things to worry about, global risks. The second, spread of infectious disease. The third, weapons of mass destruction. So actually, biological weapons get dual credit for that answer. This is what I want to talk to you about tonight. It's the nature of the threat posed by biological weapons, or BW. What are the unique challenges associated with BW? And then, okay, what are we going to do about it? So first, a down and dirty working definition. You have to realize I'm a former CIA operations officer, so we really have to keep it simple. We're not the sharpest pencils in the box, okay? Just use of agents or disease, pathogens. These are attacks not just on humans, but also on plants and on animals. Pathogens consist of 3 types: bacteria, virus, and toxins. Primarily for our purposes, it's really bacteria and viruses that do a very, very impressive job of killing people. Toxins are poisons that are produced by biological entities. They're not contagious. They're usually used for very targeted killings. So we can remember from our study of history, bacteria like the Black Plague, which there's a reason Europe entered in the Dark Ages. That's called the plague. The Spanish influenza, the incorrectly named Spanish influenza, associated with the Second World War and the immediate aftermath, which killed a minimum of 25 million people, probably a lot more. Okay, 25, will you give me 60 million, Professor?
Probably around 50.
50 million, right? A lot of people, okay? And toxins, I don't know if there are any unreconstructed cold warriors in the audience, but this is the famous umbrella gun. See if I can figure out how this pointer works here. There's the umbrella gun, which contained a pellet filled with ricin that was used to kill Georgy Markov, who was a Bulgarian dissident and writer living in London. So ricin got him. And we can see how a biological warfare attack would impact us, not just in terms of human casualties. Conservatively, we could be talking here hundreds of thousands of people. The economic harm of an offensive biological weapons attack, and then other costs that really get to societal and political implications. Could this be an existential threat to the nation state? Something to think about. Who would do such a thing? Who would launch an offensive biological weapons attack? Well, this is where we say let's round up the usual suspects. Nation states, with respect to nation states, programs are likely to have more of a military focus. They are less likely to be resource constrained. I would generalize and say for a nation state, having the capability to produce some kind of biological weapons really is not that much of a challenge. They would have the capability. The issue would be, would they have the intent to do so? Okay. Non-state actors, terrorist organizations. Al-Qaeda had attempted to build an anthrax-based biological weapons program prior to 9/11. Other groups like ISIS have called on its members to develop biological weapons. Religious cults, we'll talk about Aum Shinrikyo in Tokyo with their anthrax efforts. Criminal enterprise, lone actor, insider threat. That's the Amerithrax attacks in the United States in 2001. You could also have a blending where states might be involved in assisting non-state actors, either deliberately or in a non-sanctioned way. All right, so what are the unique challenges, right? Why is this so hard? Okay, what's the problem here? And I have to qualify myself. This is Boston University. We don't have problems. We just have challenges, right? What are the challenges? Well, first of all, these 2 points go together. There's not much of a footprint for someone that's going to be making a biological weapon. Something like building a nuclear weapon actually has quite a large footprint. There are a lot of experts that have to get involved. There are a lot of very special facilities that are needed. With biological weapons, I'm not saying you could do this in your dorm room here at Kilachun, but because of advances with synthetic biology, it is getting easier and easier and taking less and less of a footprint to do this, all right? The technology has been democratized. That's a fancy way of saying it's very, very much available globally and at fairly affordable cost. Now, with respect to nation states, here's one of the problems, dual use. What do I mean by that? Well, if we see the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans experimenting with Ebola, why do they have Ebola? Why would the North Koreans have Ebola? They're trying to develop a vaccine. They're trying to develop a cure. That's the best kind of humanitarian answer, isn't it? Is it true? We could recruit this person for the CIA, yeah. But you see what I mean? It's very hard to discern the intent. We'll talk a little bit more about these 2 points. Again, because of advances in biology and the fusion of information technology, we're in an era of synthetic biology where different techniques have made it much easier to do genetic modification, sequencing, and so on, and it's accessible to many, many more people. And you can really talk to Professor Densmore here at BU because he was just on a synthetic biology panel where they studied this at great length, right? But the point I would make is with your generation and particularly this technology, these capabilities will be more and more widely available and easier to use. And there's a quote from Venner and Cohen, who I think did the human genome, right? That the 21st century will indeed be the century of biology. Okay. To try to counter biological weapons involves this wonderful fusion of different disciplines involving national security, public health, law enforcement, the intelligence community, many others. Also, because pathogens can travel pretty easily irrespective of nation-state borders, you really need a global effort. That's easy to say in theory, very hard to implement in practice, right? The key to countering biological weapons, like it is for many threats, is getting what I call left of the boom, okay? This is from the language of IEDs, improvised explosive devices, which were one of the largest killers of US troops in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, right? That's the boom. The IED has gone off, right? If you're on the right of the boom, the bomb has gone off. Now we need to mitigate and treat. Let's get medical personnel there. Let's get a helicopter there so we can medevac. Let's make sure our hospitals have adequate blood supplies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's good. We have to be able to mitigate and treat. But ideally, you want to get left of the boom, right? You don't want the boom. You want to be boomless. You want to be boomless, folks. But you want to get to the left of the boom. In the IED world, you try to use electronic jamming that can prevent an IED from going off. You develop intelligence networks. You do supply chain interruptions. What do we do for biological weapons? If there is a nation state or a non-state actor developing BW, what do? How do we get left of the boom so we can prevent or disrupt that act? This is hard, okay? All the easy problems have been solved, folks. Your generation just has hard problems, okay? We don't really have a good track record. We, the United States government, the national security, the intelligence community, we don't have a really good track record at doing this. This is from the Soviet program involving biological weapons. The Soviets were very keen on anthrax. The US intelligence community routinely underestimated Soviet anthrax production by orders of magnitude, okay? Orders of magnitude. Did you know we had a BW attack in the United States in the 1980s in Oregon? Dulles, Oregon. Non-state actor or religious cult, the Rajneeshis, launched a salmonella attack against 10 fast food establishments. My favorite was Taco Time, right? They basically sprayed salmonella on the salad bar and the condiments bar. You're going to look differently at salad bars from now on after this talk, right? 750 poor people developed salmonella poisoning, all right? It took the authorities, the epidemiologists knew there was something really weird here because they couldn't figure out why did we have 754 people in Oregon that were sick with salmonella poisoning, right? But they couldn't find the common link, right? It was only, I think, 2 years later when a cult member was arrested on completely unrelated firearms charges that in an effort to get a better plea bargain, he told the authorities about this attack. And that's how we figured it out. Okay? 0 for 2. That's Shinrikyo, a Japanese cult. You probably know them for their sarin gas attack, nerve agent attack on the Tokyo subway. They were building a very robust anthrax program that really happened underneath the noses of the Japanese authorities, right? Why weren't they more successful? Some people will tell you it's because the team didn't really have their heart in developing a deadly anthrax weapon. Others will say they didn't have a good biochemist on the team, right? But bottom line, they spent a lot of resources trying to develop it. This is Iraq, right? Some of you might recall, March of 2003, we invented Iraq ostensibly as an example of the doctrine of preemption because we thought Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, including mobile biological weapons. We were wrong. In the first Persian Gulf War of 1993, we also invaded Iraq as part of the liberation of Kuwait. At that time, we didn't think that Iraq had any biological weapons. And guess what? They did. Right? We discovered that after. Okay? Not a good track record. These are the Amerithrax attacks of 2001. About several billion spores, anthrax, were launched, primarily disseminated through the mail. 5 people died, 30,000 people took prophylaxis. Hundreds of $1 millions are spent in the cleanup. The FBI pursued this gentleman, Mr. Hatfield, Dr. Hatfield, a virologist, for several years, convinced he had done it. He did not. The FBI identified Bruce Ivins as their culprit. I guess, not to be too morose, but I guess fortunately for the FBI, Dr. Ivins committed suicide before his trial, so we'll never really know the answer. Right? My point here is we don't really have a very good track record of getting left of the boom. We're not even so good after the boom in terms of forensic attribution. Who did this? And I would contend this is getting harder. And that's just because the technology is becoming more and more available. All right, what are our policy approaches? What are we going to do about this? Well, this is the mission of the intelligence community when it comes to any number of threats. We collect, analyze, and share information, intelligence, to hopefully prevent or disrupt such a threat. That's getting left of the boom. And should an event occur, we need attribution. Who was responsible for this, right? Very important to know. Now, this is the theory. Hard to apply the theory to practice. How do we do this? Is there a technical silver bullet, right? That's always what we want to have, this wonderful silver bullet in the form of technology. Can we build sensors that could give us early warning about the deployment of dangerous pathogens? Can we leverage the power of big data to find patterns? I'm asking these questions. They're not strictly rhetorical. Your generation is going to have to try to answer them. Bureaucratic rethinking, what is our best approach? The challenge here is you have to deal with many different communities and many different disciplines, and it's quite hard to get everyone to cooperate in the sandbox together, right? And how do we do this balancing of efforts? The cultural tooling just refers to intelligence officers, law enforcement officers, scientists think very differently, right? They think very differently in how they approach challenges, right? And that lies at the heart of why this is particularly difficult, right? Just to conclude, I think the biological weapons threat is very real now. I think your generation will face it in very robust form. That's primarily because of advances in technology. And to be sure, these advances in technology will do wonderful things. We will discover great new drugs, great new cures, great new vaccines because of advances in synthetic biology and so on. But you have to realize there's also a potentially evil side to that if it is in the wrong hands. The policy approaches are quite difficult. How do we do a better job is the challenge that I leave you with. But it's not all bad news. Our current occupant of the White House in the year 2000 wrote a book. I don't know if he wrote it. He put his name on it as the author. This book written, The America We Deserve, 18 years ago, written by Donald Trump. And you can see that then private citizen Trump was keenly aware of some of the challenges posed by biological weapons. So hopefully that spirit is alive and well in the White House. Thank you all very much. I think I have a time for some questions. If anyone is curious, happy to answer. Yes, ma'am. Wait for the microphone. Your peers want to hear you.
I was just going to say I'm interested in... Hello? I don't know. It's not working. In terms of data privacy, like, can you explain a little bit about the push-pull between, like, I'm sure that, like, FBI would love tribal demand patterns of, people, and if, like, there were to be, like, an explosion of some sort of biological weapon, like, I know that exists in tension with a lot of other things as well, but have there been any efforts to kind of, like, if you could say to people, like, this would really help if there were to be an attack, like, just the balance between, like, data privacy and, like, biological weapons?
So when you're dealing with any kind of a threat and the government's response to it, you're dealing with data privacy issues, and I think that's what the question gets at, right? How do you balance the need for privacy? How do you protect personal information at a time when you have a national security threat? And you saw this after the 9/11 attacks, right? When different measures were taken with respect to signals intelligence in terms of collection efforts, right? So with biological weapons, Fortunately, the good news is the attacks we have haven't been that severe, all right? But I have a feeling if there were a smallpox outbreak in a major United States city, right, that would get a lot of attention, right? But the challenge is, even if you use your collection arms for intelligence and law enforcement, it's still a very difficult challenge to figure out what's happened, right? Now, I don't know how many microbiologists and biochemists there are in the world. Give me millions. Yeah, including a lot of microbiologists and biochemists in countries that really don't like the United States very much, and they don't like the United States very much. It would be really nice if we could say, okay, intelligence community, you just track every telephone conversation of this particular biochemist in this evil country, right? And I kind of hope we're doing that in some ways, I don't know. But I think the challenge is our resources are very limited. Given all the threats that we face around the world, there's only so much that we can do. So primarily, we're very resource constrained, right? Even if you wanted to do these things, you just don't have the resources to do it, right? But it's a very good question, and it will remain a persistent one, particularly for your generation. Time for one more question. Anybody has a? Yes, go ahead.
My question is whether there is a distinct public policy approach to chemical weapons as opposed to biological weapons. And secondly, regarding the recent chemical attack in England, how nations should respond to events like this and against the perpetrators of such events.
Yeah, so with respect to, I think everybody could hear that. Your mic is working very well. I think you're talking about the Novichok attack in the United Kingdom, which essentially, as I understand, it's a nerve agent, right? So, in some ways, like the Ryson attack on Georgy Markov in 1978 was early precursor using toxin biology as opposed to a nerve agent. And we can speculate about the motives for the attack as far as if you think that attack was authorized at the highest levels of the Russian government, right? Read a very good article this weekend about this, pointing out that Mr. Putin has made it clear that he doesn't really respect people that have committed, in his view, treason. And Mr. Skripal would fit that category of a GRU officer who was working for the West, right? What have we done to date with respect to that attack? So Russia has suffered some public opprobrium, and the Western countries, several Western countries have banded together and have expelled ostensibly Russian diplomats, right? What else do we do? I don't know if you remember a time when President Obama said there would be a line in the sand as far as chemical attacks in Syria. Chemical attacks were launched by the Assad regime. The United States response looked rather feeble, right? Difficult issues. Chemical weapons are basically handled a little bit differently in the U.S. government approach. It depends what particular agency and how it's organized. Generally speaking, counterproliferation and WMD are kind of grouped together, if that makes sense. I have always felt that biological weapons haven't received the attention they deserve. Nuke seems to get all the play, and chem has done well thanks to the Assad regime. But I guess the point that I would leave you with is keep your eyes on biological weapons, because I really think that's going to be the area where state and non-state actors who have malicious intent are going to be able to do us harm. So with that, and I'm happy to stick around later and answer your questions.